You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew Ledrew.
Hi, my name is Lisa Timpf. I'm a writer who lives in Simcoe, Ontario, which is a couple hours southwest of Toronto. And today I'm going to be reading from my short story, The Messenger's Mission. Sweat beaded Percy's brow and trickled behind his reflective goggles as he backed up, step by reluctant step. The black eyes of the snakes wreathing Medusa's head glittered, and the serpent's sinuous bodies writhed in a mesmerizing manner. Had it not been for Thena's special reflective eyewear, Percy would have fallen victim to the monster by now. He felt certain of that. Still, the goggles didn't completely shield him from the intensity of the Gorgon's gaze. He couldn't so much as blink. And as for raising the laser cutter at his side, impossible. His muscular arms hung immobile, as though paralyzed. How confident he'd felt as he stood beside her moments ago, brandishing the cutter, ready to sever the monster's head. The greenish light from the largest of Serapha's three moons had cast enough light into the room for him to see the bland expression on Medusa's face. As she snored, the snakes quiescent. He'd almost had the cutter in position on the Gorgon's neck when her eyes had flown open. To make matters worse, the distort aura that Herm had rigged hadn't fooled the monster for a nanosecond. She'd seen him clearly. Percy ardently wished his half-brother was here in his place, experiencing the effects of that particular piece of non-functioning gadgetry. He sighed as he took another crab-wise step in retreat. Focus, he told himself, as if that came easy, with a whirl of chaotic thoughts inspired by the snakes, whose rhythmic gyrations were now making him sleepy. Percy stumbled. His shoulder encountered something solid behind him. A wall. Medusa smirked. Tongues flicking, the serpent's heads moved higher until their pitiless black eyes peered down on the Gorgon's intended prey. Those myths about an alternate universe where Herm and Thena are gods and I'm a hero, he thought. What wouldn't I give to be there now? But no, he lived in this universe, where fellow monster hunters Thena and Herm waited aboard the messenger for him to come back with his intended bounty. As the monster advanced, Percy glanced left and right, frantically seeking an escape route. What was it Thena was so fond of saying? When all else fails, cause a distraction. Striving to regain control of his muscles, Percy managed to slap his open palm against the wall. This gesture produced a sound so weak that even Percy could barely hear it. Nonetheless, Percy sensed the monster's concentration sagging. Medusa's hair fell limply. The snake's eyelids snapped shut and the hissing halted. I can move, Percy thought as he flexed his arms. Before he could take advantage of his returning strength and take aim with the laser cutter, his keen ears detected a scuffing sound from the dimly lit hallway. Another monster, perhaps? Better hurry then. He took a step toward Medusa. But the noise he'd heard hadn't sounded like the rasp of talons or the inexorable patting of paws. More like human footfalls. Human-esque, anyway. Percy craned his neck to see around Medusa's bulk and blinked in surprise. There in the doorway stood a bleary-eyed child in a pink nightgown patterned with white centaurs. The girl's fine features bore the promise of future beauty, if you overlooked the tiny snakes wreathing her head. Mommy, I'm thirsty, the girl whispered. Oh, sweetie, Medusa sighed. I'll get you a glass of water, but then you have to go right back to bed, okay? The child nodded and Medusa slipped away down the hall. Sensing the child's attention turning to him, Percy hid the weapon behind his back and plastered an innocent smile across his handsome face. Medusa returned with a tumbler of water, which the child gulped down. Thanks, Mommy, the child whispered, handing the glass back to her mother. Back to your room now, Medusa said in that fond but firm voice peculiar to parents. But what about the monsters under the bed? We checked already, Medusa replied. They're all fine, remember? I remember, the girl sighed. Good night. And good night, Mr. Whatever your name is. Percy, the monster hunter replied, bowing graciously. My name is Percy. Good night, Mr. Percy. After the girl pattered away down the hall, man and Gorgon regarded one another solemnly. This makes no difference, Percy told himself firmly. A monster is a monster is a monster, even if... Where were we? He asked the monster, arching his right eyebrow. As I recall, Medusa said, her voice grating, I had you backed against the wall.
Thank you very much.
Lisa Timpf. Is that how you pronounce your last name, by the way?
Timpf, yes.
Timpf.
Yeah.
Okay, making sure. Lisa Timpf, what are the most common traps or pitfalls for aspiring authors?
I think one of the biggest pitfalls is not actually telling a story. And I think in some of my original stories, what I did is I had a sequence of events, but it didn't really have the elements necessary for a story. So, it's a work in progress and something I'm continually trying to improve. Sometimes I'd write a story and accidentally it has those elements, but all too often I go back and look, and some of the unsuccessful stories were just a sequence of events that didn't really lead anywhere, didn't lead to protagonist growth or things like that.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Awesome. That's a really good piece of advice, actually. That's one we haven't gotten before. Lisa Timpf, what's the best money that you ever spent as a writer on your writing work?
That's a really good question. I would have to say some of the earlier courses that I took. So I used to do distance education because I was working at the same time trying to start to write. And some of the courses I took with distance education, particularly one on poetry writing that introduced me to a whole lot of different poetry styles, was very helpful. And that was probably some of the best money that I'd spent.
Nice. That's wonderful. Perfect. Lisa Timpf, do you know of any important magazines for writers to subscribe to or anything like that? I usually include mailing lists and newsletters now because, it's the digital age and writing. A lot of writers don't go out and pick up writing magazines anymore, sadly.
Yeah, I would say that one of the websites, and it also accompanied by a newsletter that I find the most useful, is there's an author named, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, K.M. Wayland.
Okay.
And she has written some stuff about archetypal figures and finding your story's theme. She's also written some books, which I've subsequently purchased. And one of the most useful blog pieces of hers that I read was about connecting your opening events to your closing and your inciting event to your climax and that type of thing. Really made a lot of sense and really helped me with structuring my stories.
That makes sense. Yeah. Structure's huge when I do writing classes and stuff like that. But also, it's so hard to teach any other form of writing. Like, there's that kind of loose, just write what you feel, man.
Yeah.
But how do you teach that? It's all in the sentence. You just taught it. Write what you feel. That's it. Whole lesson.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Awesome. Good answer. Lisa Timpf, what does literary success look like for you? Like right now, what's your goalpost? What's success in your mind?
What's success in my mind?
Yeah.
I would say getting published with more and more prestigious markets. For example, there's a publication called Third Flatiron, and recently I had a short story published with them in their Brain Games anthology, and that was really kind of a landmark for me because it's reasonably prestigious in the science fiction fantasy market.
It is.
So I would say success would be being able to get stories placed in more and more of those types of markets.
Awesome. Excellent. Great. Yeah. Lisa Timpf, what kind of research do you do and how long do you spend researching before beginning a short story or novel?
I would say I do. It would very much depend. So some stories that I draw on my own experience or that type of thing, I wouldn't have done a lot of research. But other stories I have researched, or there's stories that I'm thinking about doing that I'll research. For example, I'm thinking about doing a story about gambling and how casinos might put in, software to kind of trick you into becoming addicted. So you have a lot of early success. So what I would do is I would do some research into gambling and how do people become addicted or kind of semi-addicted to that. So that type of thing. So it's very much story dependent. And I'll do as much or as little research as I feel necessary. And sometimes I'll realize the need for research when I'm partway in and I'll have a question, how does this work? How does that work? Or that type of thing.
Awesome. I look forward to reading that story. That sounds awesome. I love stories about that subject matter. Yeah, that is awesome. Um, Lisa Timpf, have you ever read anything, read fiction that makes you think differently about fiction? Something that kind of changes your point of view on fiction itself?
Um, that's a really good question. I think what I've started to do is I've started to review books to kind of improve my own writing. So
Sure.
as you go through and you analyze writing, one that I read fairly recently by a Canadian author isn't sort of set up like a traditional novel, but it's sort of snippets, different people as this project proceeds, how it impacts them. So I found that very interesting. It wasn't traditional, yet it still worked. And then I read a recent novel by Nina, and I'm probably going to butcher her last name, Munteanu, I think her name is, and she wrote Diary in the Age of Water.
Yep.
And it was kind of set up as diary entries. And again, it was very effective. It worked that way. So I guess what I've learned is that yes, you can have the structure and people say, yeah, do the A, B, C, and D. And yet sometimes you can use a non-traditional form and it still works.
Okay. I like that. That works. Thank you. Lisa Timpf, what was your favorite childhood book? Favorite book you read when you were a child or read to children, whatever, how you want to approach it?
So I think I'll probably throw in a few authors, but probably my earliest favorite childhood author was Thornton W. Burgess, who wrote about, Peter Cottontail and Jimmy Skunk. And it was set in the Green Forest and it was about animals and that sort of thing. I just love those. And maybe it dates me, but my mom and I used to be able to go and buy the individual books in the series for 75 cents a book. Oh. And I actually still have some of those books. And I would say also as a teenager, I really liked Walter Farley's The Black Stallion, Jim Kjelgaard, Big Red, and all of those books. And then I got interested in like Andre Norton, Robert A. Heinlein, and that kind of got me into the science fiction thing.
I've read all of Heinlein, and Walter Farley was my first series.
Oh yeah,
first book series I ever had.
Yeah.
No one says Walter Farley anymore. Everyone that one's kind of been forgotten, sadly. Yeah. Lisa Timpf, what's the first book you ever read you remember that made you cry?
First book I read. Well, we used to have. My parents were part of the Doubleday Book Club, so you get books, and one of them was a Reader's Digest compilation of some of Rudyard Kipling's stories, including The Jungle Book.
Okay.
And I think some of the stories in that made me cry, particularly the one about the Doles come in and they invade the territory, and then the leader of the pack dies in that battle, and I think that made me cry.
Lisa Timpf, what's your favorite unknown book? A book that you've read and enjoy, but you feel like whenever you bring it up, nobody else has ever heard of this book.
Well, maybe nowadays it might be, I'm not sure how many people are still familiar with Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, but I thought it was a fabulous book. I ran across it when I was in university. And it's about a guy that goes on a cross-country motorcycle trip with his son and a couple of friends, but there's flashbacks to his life and his struggles with sort of mental health and all that. And it was very philosophical, just a really interesting book.
Cool. All right. I like that. That's awesome. Lisa Timpf, does writing energize you or does it exhaust you? Like, does it kind of, when you're done writing, have you got energy? Did it give you energy, or are you just drained and the act of creation just took it all out of you? Which way are you?
I would say both things happen. More often I'm energized, but sometimes it's a bit of a slog. So I did the April Poetry Month, trying to write a poem a day.
Oh, wow.
And some days it was just a total slog and just exhausting. And yet on those days were some of the poems that when I look back, I think were the best poems.
Yeah. There's that kind of like art through adversity kind of thing going on there, possibly. Yeah. Lisa Timpf, do you ever hide secrets in your stories that only a few people, like a few readers will ever pick up on?
I think there's little things here and there that in a couple of stories that I've done that. I'm trying to think of an example offhand, but I can't. But sometimes I'll try and put a little bit of subtle humor, and I know not everybody's going to get it, but I know that some people probably will.
Okay, makes sense. I like it. You are very funny as a writer. There's a lot of humor in your work. I like it, and you could just tell it even in the way that you're reading it and stuff like that. It works. I like it a lot. It's
Thanks.
very cool. No, it's awesome. Lisa Timpf. Well, first of all, I should ask before I ask. I didn't do a proper introduction with you like I do to some authors with the episodes, and I don't have your bio up in front of me like I do sometimes. Do you have any novels?
Any novels?
Yeah.
I've got 2 novelettes or novellas, I guess. They're about 1,200, 1,300 words with JMS Books. One is called To Push Back the Darkness, and it's sort of a sci-fi romance, police procedural. And then the other one's called Curtain Call, and it's about a woman as she's aging and realizing that she's got to give up sports one day. Competitive team sports, and sort of her struggle with that, and trying to get her teammates to keep playing when really they're all ready to move on, and how she comes to grips with that.
That's excellent. Okay, that sounds. I'm gonna check out the latter one especially. That sounds really cool. But so I was gonna ask, have you ever experienced the sophomore slump? So if you've never heard of this, there's this experience with writers where they get a success, whether it's early or later or whatever, either a short story published with a really cool publication, or a novel gets out there, and then they get a case of the yips, and it just goes boo, and they have trouble writing after that reaching that early goal kind of thing. And the second work or the second book takes a lot more effort, and it's a lot more difficult, and you're a lot harder on yourself. We call it the sophomore slump. And I was wondering if you had experienced that, and if so, if you could kind of share your experience with it.
I probably wouldn't say that I did have experienced that. In my professional life before I retired, I was in human resources and communication. And there you have to keep putting the stuff out, whether you feel like it or not that day. And so I think that kind of put me into a mindset where, okay, you're going to have ups and downs, but you just push through it.
Yeah. I'm very like that too. People call me mechanical. I write 500 words a day, even if I hated them. I get up, I get a coffee, I get toast, and I write 500 words. And I can't get up from that desk until I do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is a weird question, and this is one you might skip. It's a new question that's a result of answers people used to give for another thing. Basically, I used to ask a question. One of the questions I used to ask, people used to answer Stephen King for that thing a lot. So I decided to make a question specifically about Stephen King. But if you haven't read him or don't read a lot of him or whatever, you can just skip it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But the question is, what is your favorite and least favorite Stephen King novel?
So my favorite one probably, it's been a while since I read Stephen King, but from what I remember, The Dead Zone was one that I really liked.
Oh.
I didn't mind The Shining. It was okay. And I would say then as he got toward Pet Sematary and stuff like that, it just got a little much for me. And I said, okay, enough.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Love it. I'm a huge King fan. I wrote my honors thesis on The Dark Tower. Love it. He can go a bit much sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh, why did you have to do that much cocaine, Stephen? What were you thinking?
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Lisa Timpf, how do you select names for your characters? What process do you use for that?
I have a little book that I write names down in. And I did a kind of a Google search for different ethnicities, Acadian or French Canadian or that sort of thing. I do, and then some, Swedish or German or whatever. And then when I'm trying to do a character profile, then I'll go back to that list, and I'll often draw from that list to pair up a first name and a last name kind of at random. And sometimes I'll change the letters just a little bit. just in case there really is a person by that name, to make it a little bit different.
That's good. That's cool. That's good. That's a good process. Lisa Timpf, what is your writing kryptonite? So if you sit down to write and this thing happens, it just destroys. There's not going to be any writing that day now. Like this happened, that's it. Productivity's gone.
I would say if something kind of throws me off my schedule, like I kind of have a task list for the day and here's what I want to do. And if something unexpected comes up that chews up a lot of time, then I think that really kind of throws me off kilter, and it sometimes means that I'm just not going to get to writing that day. And I think realistically, sometimes you have to realize, okay, life's going to interfere. I've got other things that are a priority, but that can kind of throw me off my game a little bit.
Yeah, I would say so. That makes sense. Yeah.
Sure.
Lisa Timpf, do you think that someone can be a good writer if they don't feel emotions strongly, or if they don't understand emotionality?
I think they can. Like, so the one book that I read, A Diary in the Age of Water, a lot of that was kind of factual. Yes, there was emotion in it, but I think there's certain books that could be more factual that you wouldn't necessarily need the emotion, or the emotion would come across to the reader anyway. Like, say, for example, The Martian by Andy Weir. Like I'm not saying he doesn't understand emotion, but the nature of that story, just telling that story, you would get enough across that a person could still enjoy reading the story.
Yeah, no, that one very much relies on very standard hero's journey. Like, here's the person, there is a problem, keep trying to fix that problem.
That's right.
New solution, and he won,
Yeah.
My example is always, and you're a sci-fi writer, reader for the sounds of things, so my always goes to Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke, where it's just, I talk about this book in my writing classes and kind of joke about it, because it's like, he teases like interhuman conflict, like there are opportunities for it, and he says, no, I'm not going to do that. Like two of the astronauts that go up to the Rama planet are like ex-husband and ex-wife, and you're like, oh, we'll get some drama here. No, they're never in a scene together. It doesn't come up. It's just like, what are you doing? But it's good. Lisa Timpf, are you friends with any other authors where you are locally or online or whatever? And if so, how do they help you become a better writer?
So I'm a member of two organizations. One is SF Canada, Science Fiction Canada, and the other one is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. So it provides a kind of a network for people. If somebody has a question, they throw it out there and people give answers. Sometimes people share leads on markets. Sometimes they'll say, hey, this is a really neat poem I read somewhere, come and have a look, So I think those have been really helpful, particularly when it comes to sharing information, sharing knowledge, giving answers. That's been very helpful.
Awesome. Is that how you, just out of curiosity, this is part of the question really, but is that how you found it? It occurs to me, I don't know how you discovered Mythology from the Rock or the engine submissions or anything like that. I'm happy you did, but is that how you found the engine submission stuff?
What I do for submissions is I have a series of, I have a bunch of different blogs that I check, or sites. There's one writer, her name escapes me, that posts like upcoming markets. There's a Facebook group that has links. Raylan.com is a good resource, the Horror Tree, New Pages. So I go through all of these once a week just to sort of see what's out there. And they all kind of cover a different niche. Like you might find it in two places, but not in the other one. And I think I ran across that call in one of those, or it may have been something that one of the members on SF Canada shared.
Maybe we got a few people in SF Canada too.
Yeah, okay. There's at least one other I know for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that's really cool. Well, I hope that you are following our page so that you can see all the opportunities when they come up. Because I would love to see your stuff in our inbox more and more. That's awesome.
Okay. Good.
Are there any authors, and I mean their work, not the author themselves, but are there any authors that you disliked their work at first and later grew to like them as you read more and more of them?
That's a tricky one, because sometimes if I read something I really don't like, then I'm not going to go back there again. I'd have to give that one some thought. I'm just kind of scanning my bookshelves to see. I've often found the reverse. That's something I really like. I'm one of those people that will reread a book. And sometimes I find that something I really, really liked, all of a sudden I go back to it. It's like, ugh, but the reverse, I would have to give that some thought. Nothing comes to mind offhand of somebody that kind of grew on me.
What's something where it happened the other way?
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, for example, when I was at university, Khalid Gibran, like his one book was really in. A friend of mine bought it for me. I thought that was so cool. I read it. And I went back to read it again, like just a couple months ago. And it's like, I can't read this. Like,
yeah,
I've changed and the book hasn't, and it just didn't do it for me anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. That can be really true, I find, of books that really exist in the here and now. Like if you had a book, say, that was dealing with something topical, like LGBTQ issues or something like that, and it was written in the early 80s, it would use some language that wouldn't be great now.
Right.
You know what
I
mean?
Yeah. So and that is true. I think I have found that with a couple books for sure.
And it's you try to tell yourself that, like, oh, it was a different time and the intentions are different, and this is still supposed to be a positive book. Like, this language was acceptable at the time, but it changes the book. Like, sometimes, like, as society grows away, like, the book was it was normal in the time it was made, and society's grown away from it.
Yes.
I find that with I love it, and I'll never not love it, but Star Trek The Next Generation, there are a few episodes of it where they're trying to deal with issues, and they're dealing with it from the point of view of the late 80s, and now we are in the 2020s, and it's like, oh, you did not, no, that did not stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Lisa Timpf, how many hours a day do you write? You were saying earlier you were very scheduled, and so a lot of writers try to gauge, like, how much time a day should I be doing to this? So what's it like for you?
Again, I would say it varies. I try to spend at least an hour a day writing. There's a lot of other stuff that takes time, like tracking your markets, dealing with responses, doing edits, that type of thing. So exclusive of that, I try to actually physically write for an hour a day, at least. During National Novel Writing Month, I didn't write a novel, but I tried to write X amount of words every day. And that was the one time I probably succeeded every single day in doing something, or April Poetry Month, every single day doing something. But I try to keep it I try not to pressure myself to do it on weekends. Try to keep it to weekdays. But I'd say I try to target an hour a day of actual writing and not doing all the other administrative writing stuff.
Awesome. That's great. I there's one day a week that I don't write, but I still have to write 500 words a day. So I actually write 600 words a day and then move the extra over.
Yeah.
Because I'm a lunatic. And then I look back and I mark it on the calendar as though I wrote that day because I still have that many words because I'm a lunatic. Lisa Timpf, what part of your life do you find you draw experience from the most often to write? So your childhood, teenage years, young adult, beyond, whatever. You know what I mean?
I think actually I've written a fair number of my stories have been related to growing older. So I would say later life. I put some of my characters in situations where they're dealing with aging issues or that type of thing. And having dealt with aging parents too, like drawing on that experience.
Sure.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.